In this video, I'd like to explore what I think are the 7 most important topics, arenas to explore, to be aware of, to give attention to. But before we begin that, take a moment and question, what are the metrics? What's the basis to answer this question? Meaning, if you're going to come up with a list of 7 things that the species of human beings would benefit from exploring more than any other topics, how do you come up with that list? What is the basis for weighing one thing versus another? For example, a book on happiness or a book on pain mitigation. Which is more important to you and why? So, what is the metric to use to discern the single most significant impacting topics, the topics with the most impact on the most number of people, for the most amount of time, the most intensely? Because that's what makes a list relevant, if it affects you, and you, and you, and you, and affects you a lot, and affects you for a long period of time. If something affects you for a second, it's not as important as something that affects you for a lifetime. If something affects you a little bit, it's not as important as something that affects you a lot. And if something affects one person on the planet, it's not as important as if it affects everyone on the planet. So when we talk about effect, we're talking about impact. And when we talk about impact, we're talking really about the underlying drive of every human being to feel sustainably better over time and avoid feeling chronically worse. That's what's important to impact. Because if something makes us feel sustainably better in a major way for a really long time, it's a big deal to us. If something makes the species feel sustainably better, now sustainably, just to back up, we're talking about the difference between cocaine and a healthy diet. A healthy diet makes you feel better and better the longer you eat it. Cocaine has a pretty short lifespan, and over time, in many ways, can lead to you feeling chronically worse as it affects your liberty, as it affects your finances, as it affects your body and relationship, and you need more and more of it to feel the same way you did at the beginning. So that's the sustainability continuum. And so what are these things? What's on your list of 7 things? What's one item? So pick one item that you believe would affect the species more than anyone else, and why. And this can be a converging point or a diverging point because every perspective, by definition, is unique. Perspective, a personal spect from the Latin to see. Perspective, my perspective, my spect, my sight. My sight, if you look at perspective from a geometric perspective, on a geometric dimension, you see that every single person is standing in a slightly different position. No 2 people can be on the exact same position at the same time. So every person stands in a different position. And that position affects the angle of sight, the vertical and horizontal angle of sight, that alone changes the sight. So every single person sees things differently. And to get a really good picture, a really good view, you need to look through lots of people's eyes simultaneously. Because to look at lots of people's eyes simultaneously is to see the object from here, and the object from here, and the object from here, and the object from here, the object from this paradigm, the object from that paradigm. Then you really get to know the probability field of the object that's being looked at, because you're seeing it from many angles. So number one, developing a relationship with other planets and life from other planets. So in our galaxy, I think it's estimated there are 1 billion planets capable of sustaining life. And if we just roll the dice and say, okay, there's a 50-50 chance that some of those planets developed before us, developed what we would consider to be intelligent life before us, and that some of these planets, let's say half, since it's an unknown, if we're playing 50-50 and being humble to the unknown, 50% of those billion planets developed intelligent life before us, and 50% developed intelligent life after us. So some of the life on the billion planets conducive to life are going to be more developed. By developed, we're talking about higher degrees of complexity. By developed, we're also talking about difference. Because we may have developed, for example, the best way to send data on fiber optic cables. It's possible that we are actually the best at doing that in our galaxy. But what about what about conflict resolution? We're not very good at that at all. We have an endless amount of personal, national, and global conflict. What if there's another one of those planets where the intelligent life form on that planet is the best in the galaxy for mitigating conflict? What if one is the best at telepathy, precluding conflict? Because a tremendous amount of human conflict comes through the veil of language. All thought, human thought, is predicated on language, is enabled through language. You cannot think a thought without the words that compose the thought. Just like you cannot sing a song without notes. You cannot think a thought without the words that compose and shape the thought. But if you could see telepathically, you would get rid of the interference patterns of the fact that different people weight different words and different paradigms in different ways. So, developing relationships with other planets and life from those planets is a game changer, because they've got, some of them, 1 billion years of expertise that we don't have. We're not going to get it anytime in the next 100 years either. But by exposure to another technology, in the same way that the West brought cellular technology, cell phones, to third world countries and helped them bypass actual phone lines, there's a way that more developed species in certain areas, I'm not talking about better as consciousness or as beings, but rather that because technology, the technology of language, the technology of thought, the technology of coding, the technology of electricity, because technology is so contextual, because we develop the technologies that matter the most in our environment, and because every environment is different, it is statistically inevitable that of those billion planets that support or are capable of supporting life, let's just say there's 1 million. So 1 in 1,000 that have the possibility conducive of intelligent life. 1 in 1,000. So there's 1 million forms of life, and let's just say 500,000 of them do something. Maybe they cook food, maybe they grow food, maybe they recycle, maybe they do something we've never heard of, better than anyone on this planet ever has or ever will. They do it much better. And maybe there's another 500,000 that do things worse. Seems reasonable. Let's just say there's 10. Let's be really conservative and say out of all those billions of possibilities, there's just 10. And 5 of them do something important way better, exponentially better than we do. 5 of them do something worse. Fine. Contact with those 5 planets is the single biggest game changer of paradigm, of self-awareness, of consciousness, and of technology. It is a state of grace to encounter a consciousness, a species capable of demonstrating, of embodying a technology of some kind that is exponentially better, more efficient, more intelligent than our own. And if we look with some degree of objectivity, understanding that if you want to be conservative and say there are 5, if you want to be generous and say there's 500,000 or 1 million, that some of those planets appear to have engaged. If we look at the credible information from top military, top government, top intelligence, and top pilots, astronauts, there is a startling number of highly competent, highly informed people who are certain, based on the evidence, that our planet has had outreach by some of the life forms in our galaxy or in our universe. Exploring that, bringing that to light, is huge. Number 2, understanding and clarifying the nature of intelligence and then pursuing it. What does it mean to be intelligent? How do we rate one another's intelligence? Because there's different possible definitions. If someone can rattle off the encyclopedia, are they highly intelligent? What if they can rattle off the encyclopedia, the entire encyclopedia, word for word, and are an alcoholic with depression who abuses their children? Are they still intelligent? Is that intelligent behavior? What if they have multiple university degrees and like to kill people in their spare time? Is that intelligent? In other words, what is your definition of intelligence? And I'd like to suggest that the most intelligent definition of intelligence is the measure of the efficiency with which energy, time, money, natural resources, intensity, with which energy is transformed, is transmuted into sustainable well-being. That the most intelligent person on the planet would use little or no energy to create sustainable well-being that rippled out and touched the entire planet. That's intelligence. Because when you can lift a planet's sustainable well-being with little or no energy expenditure, you're talking about a high level of brain function. Low level of brain function is reptilian, fight, flight, freeze, sociopathic. It's a low level. It's a crocodile brain. It takes the transcendent brain to even be interested in a planet. The most intelligent people have broad vision that includes a paradigm that is ecological, that is synergistic, that is interconnected. It takes more intelligence to perceive that system because there's more complexity within that system. So we're talking about a highly complex paradigm. And then everyone wants to get more of what they want more efficiently. That's why we learn from someone that has found a shortcut. Why do people watch these YouTube videos about how to make money faster or easier or with less risk? They're trying to learn a more intelligent way of creating what they want, in this case, money. They're trying to develop a more efficient protocol of generating value. So the most intelligent person would spend little or no energy to create sustainable well-being for everyone, reliably and consciously, and have a paradigm and a technology for doing so. That's intelligence. Now, when we understand what intelligence is and pursue it, when we start measuring what matters, sustainable well-being, and the cost to produce it, for one person, for 1 hour, for a species, for a country, the cost to produce it, and lowering the cost and increasing the yield of sustainable well-being. Now, the number one thing for an intelligent cult or culture to do is to pursue that intelligence scientifically, to do more of the things that lead to more intelligence more rapidly and more efficiently. Number 3, studying trauma and the reptilian brain, studying empathy and the empathic brain, and the probability fields that emerge from the protocols that reside within these two brain centers. So within the reptilian brain, you have fight, flight, freeze, you have trauma, you have PTSD. So when you traumatize an individual and do not repair that trauma, you activate the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain activated says, okay, I've got to do something. What am I going to do? And it says, I'm going to fight something smaller than me. I'm going to run from something bigger than me. And I'm going to freeze if neither of those options are easily available to me. Fight, flight, freeze. In a sociopathic paradigm, because the reptilian brain is designed to operate around sociopaths. Reptiles are sociopathic. The crocodile will attack the 5-year-old rather than the couple that the 5-year-old is walking with, because the 5-year-old is easy prey. The empath is the opposite. The empath would ask the adults to carry the burden so that the 5-year-old, which is smaller, does not. So if we understand that trauma leads to an activation of fight, flight, and freeze, and empathy in a culture in which trauma is healed, mitigated, resolved, leads to protocols of communication, of understanding, of caring, of trust building, of into-me, you see, that the empathic brain leads in those directions. There is a probability field, meaning if you take 100 individuals and have all of the big ones prey on all the small ones, and all the small ones run from the big ones, and those that are caught in the middle freeze, and you watch the well-being, the sustainable well-being that erupts out of that probability field, out of that algorithm of fight, flight, and freeze. It is a predatory, short-lived, highly traumatic life. Visioning, empathy, trust building. If you look at what 100 people brainstorming, collaborating, sharing, growing, educating one another, attuning, you see an explosion of synergy that is mathematically off the charts compared with the descent. Because crocodiles eat one another, and that's where the reptilian brain comes from. Crocodile sees a wounded crocodile, it seizes the wounded crocodile and eats it. There's one less crocodile, one less partner to synergize with, one less resource. But the crocodile doesn't have the brain to synergize, to partner, to communicate, to say, hey, what did you learn? How can I learn something from you? This is incapable. The crocodile is only capable of fight, flight, freeze. That's it. And so it makes sense to prey on the vulnerable for a crocodile, with a crocodile brain. The probability field of human beings living like crocodiles is so small compared to the probability field, mathematically speaking, of living out of empathy, that the study of these two brains and the interactions that lead to trauma or empathy, to the reptilian brain or the empathic brain, is one of the single biggest arenas of science and intelligence to explore. 4, conscious cultural design. How do we create the most intelligent, conscious community in groups of, say, 100 people? Dunbar's law suggests that groups begin to fracture and lose intimacy when they get over 150 people. So you can keep a group at around 100. You've got high levels of awareness, high levels of empathy that comes from that awareness. What is the most intelligent microculture that can be designed as pods of 100 people in community? What does that look like? How does one fund such a community? How does one invest in such a community? How does one create such a community? 5, developing meaningful species-wide data about the protocols and identities that lead to the most efficient transformation of energy into sustainable well-being, that lead to intelligence. What school on the planet creates inspiration, creates useful knowledge that correlates to well-being, creates vitality and joy in the student, and integrates the cult or culture. What protocol, what school does that better than any other school on the planet? And what does it the worst? What's the worst school? What's the better? And what can we learn from that data? What human being creates more sustainable well-being for those around them and themselves than any other human being? And how do they do it? How do you grow food healthier with less energy than any other place on the planet that's growing food? How do you do it? How do they do it? Disseminating data, disseminating best practices, measuring what matters, and disseminating best practices throughout the species. Gathering, sharing, and disseminating data that matters is unspeakably important and transformational. And it is possible with the internet, with apps, in a way that has never been possible on this planet before, certainly in our sense of known history. Technology for collaboration, trust building, investing in brilliant futures via what would currently be called apps, but technologies for creating synergy that are highly win-win and highly efficient. Technologies that create highly win-win synergies. Incredibly important. Apps that gather and share information. You can think of Wikipedia as a very small beginning. Think of a detailed, nuanced profile of every human being and their resources, overlaid with species-wide vision that elaborated on the most effective path for each human being on the planet to make the biggest contribution for a brilliant, sustainable future that their body, that their resources, that their mind, that their drives were capable of producing. And then giving each individual the free choice to follow that path or create a better one or do nothing. Real freedom to make a profound difference or not. Transcendent consciousness and the exploration of transcendent consciousness through the science of psychedelics, through the science of synergy, through the science of love, through the science of empathy. What is adult love? It's loving enough to care. It's caring enough to see. It's taking enough time seeing to understand. It's understanding enough to empathize. It's empathizing enough to attune. It's attuning competently enough to succeed. It's being successful at behaving in such a way as to accelerate the sustainable development of survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, unique personal talents, integrating those talents synergistically with the world, and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves. When we use adult love to care enough about ourself to see enough to understand, to attune enough to succeed, to help ourselves survive, be secure in that survival, experience love and belonging, love and welcome all of the parts of self to the table, bring that forward by aspiring to our ideals and earning the esteem that comes from living those ideals, from moving forward to discover and develop our personal gifts and talents, bringing those effectively into the world, generating the abundance that comes from that, and transcending the limited identity of the fixation with self by becoming part of a synergy, something bigger than ourselves. That's adult love. That's adult self-love. As soon as you love yourself, the kindest thing you can possibly do is to love another. It's profoundly selfish to learn to love another. To have another adult, another competent, self-actualized adult in your world is the most profound gift you can possibly give yourself. And psychedelics are part of the pattern disruption protocol, part of the disengaging from the cult and what's called the default mode network in the brain. This is something John Hopkins is exploring with psilocybin. That psilocybin does not lead to an explosion of brain activity. Rather, it leads to a cessation of the default mode network, a shutting down of normal corridors of repression and control, such that unusual parts of the brain, unusual memories and ideas can engage in gestalt in ways that the default mode prevents most of the time in order to maintain a status quo. Exploring transcendent consciousness and the mathematics of synergy is what can emerge through the science of psychedelics, through the science of consciousness, through the science of brain, through the science of adult love, unleashing a possibility field that is the most intelligent that this planet and our species has ever seen, as it produces a large percentage of adults capable of loving themselves and then other people as adults. Not the child love of I need, nothing wrong with that. That's a child. Not the adolescent love of I want, I lust. Nothing wrong with that. It's adolescent love. But the adult love, I love enough to care. I care enough to see. I see enough to understand. I understand enough to empathize. I empathize enough to attune. I attune enough to succeed at helping you become self-actualized, helping you become sustainably secure, survive, develop love and belonging for who you are. Understand your ideals and become someone that fits your ideals. Adult love is powerful, intelligent, scientifically relevant in the mathematical field of possibility that it unleashes for the species and the planet. It is relevant to our lives. These 7 things: developing a relationship with other planets, understanding and clarifying the nature of intelligence and pursuing it, studying the trauma and the traumatic brain, empathy and the empathic brain, conscious cultural design as we create pods of highly effective human beings, developing a meaningful species-wide collection of data, and the technology to gather and disperse that data effectively, and moving towards transcendent consciousness and the science of transcendence, the mathematical possibility field of transcendence, and embracing the technology of the sacred use of psychedelics.